The UN is up to no good again, this time undermining a democratic nation in favor of violent Islamic radicals. And no, it isn't Israel. So that's nice that the UN has found a new target for its shenanigans, but it's also bad that the UN has found a new target for its shenanigans, this time India. Now, I'm going to argue this is a good thing for the rest of the world, not because I support the UN's actions in India here, but it's good that we can get maybe 1 billion people to realize how stupid and corrupt the UN is. So here's where we are right now. The United Nations is sending the head of their human rights organization. They want to send them into India to be a third party and have sort of negotiating powers in changing the law around CAA, the Citizenship Amendment Act. Now, this is straight out globalism or internationalism, whatever you want to call it. So not globalization, but globalism, as I define it, internationalism. The bad guy here is the process of undermining democracies internationally, right? Taxation without representation, essentially. The fact that the UN, which India doesn't really get to vote in, but gets to make laws for sovereign India. Now, you can argue that India does have a seat at the UN, but the UN should not be making laws or changing laws within other countries, especially democracies like India. Now, so what citizen membership the CAA does, you have to understand, is that it changes the laws to make it easier to claim refugee status in India. So it doesn't affect any Indians, actually. What it says is religious minorities in Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Bangladesh, they can get Indian citizenship if they're part of religious minorities in those countries. This is basically everything except Islam. Sikhs, Buddhism, Christians, Hindus, even maybe there's 3 Jews. I think there's 1 Jew left in Afghanistan. So I think he might be able to get, I don't know, I do think the number is 1, or maybe he left 10 years ago, but I think it's 1-0. So this is the new bill. It allows refugees to claim Indian citizenship status. Now, there is mass protests over this. And if you watch John Oliver, and John Oliver had this amazing line that just showed, okay, this is the views of the radical left, is he was doing this whole anti-Modi thing. He took, it's funny, he's cracking jokes for 4 minutes, and he gets into it. And the first thing he shows is, oh, Modi's not this great divider. People are literally protesting and burning buses because they're literally saying, I hate you more than I'll hurt myself to hurt you. And it's like, so they become heroic for burning public buses? Or do you not see that there's another balance to this thing, that the counter-protesters or the radicals here have been incredibly violent, which has led to part of this situation? So the UN has blamed India for everything that's happened. The Islamist radicals, listen, they've been trying to undermine the country since whatever. I mean, they're Islamist radicals. They won't represent all Muslims. But there are separatist leaders in Kashmir. There's Pakistani-backed terrorist groups. There's Islamist radicals. I mean, this is part of the game. And they started the violence. I mean, the violence started with their rioting, and then many, many Hindus were killed. There have been some riots in response, less riots on that front. I mean, more Hindus have been killed than Muslims, but this isn't really the point. I mean, but this is what the UN is getting involved. And this is the point I want to make is, this is globalism, right? This is the UN trying to undermine India's sovereign ability to dictate its own laws, and also we think the laws they're trying to dictate are clearly silly. And the only time they're intervening is in face of Islamist pressure. Now, there's also the hypocrisy element of, why are they intervening in India's laws when they're not intervening in Pakistan's laws? So they're worried that India might become Hindu nationalist. I still think it'll be a secular state with Hindu values, which is sort of like the West, which I'm fine with. But what they're trying to do is sort of say, oh, we must protect secularism, blah, 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 blah. You can't make that argument and then back Pakistan, because Pakistan has literal laws saying Ahmadiyya Muslims are illegal because that's blasphemy, right? They tried to murder a Christian woman, Asia Bibi. We had to give her refugee status because they claimed she drank from the wrong water fountain, and they were going to murder her. And she was a mother. There was just a Sikh girl kidnapped in Pakistan, and there was a whole riot about that. And a Sikh man was killed by an Islamist mob there. Bangladesh, people are being chopped up with machetes. The Taliban runs Afghanistan. So you can see why the reason is why you would need these laws. Now, you can also talk about NRC, the National Citizenship Registry. I don't think this is the most practical law. I've talked about it. It seems... If we're just taking a pro-India stance here, purely, if we're just playing games and taking a side here, the pro-India criticism here is It just opens you up to too much criticism. It's really bad optics to create a national citizenship registry, and what's the potential utility? Now, I can see different border states because apparently, the amount of people illegally crossing into India from Bangladesh is insane, right? It makes the U.S.-Mexico border crossing look like nothing, and that's something we just don't see. But you might be better off with, a wall. Might be a better measure there than a national citizenship registry because it would look bad. It just looks bad on the optics, and I don't think it'll do much of anything either way. By my understanding, but I could be wrong there. So the real thing here is this would be a great time for everyone else in the world to support India against the UN, because India is a rather powerful country coming up. And again, that's 1 billion people plus. That's, over 10% of the world's population. If we can turn them against the UN, I think that's a rather good thing. So the UN, Human Rights Commission, basically not taking human rights seriously. Again, there's 2 countries that made it onto the UN Human Rights Commission this year, Mauritania and Libya. Why do I bring that up? Those are the only 2 countries in the world with active slave markets. So if we've learned anything, if you want to get on the UN's Human Rights Council, you should open up a slave market, and only when you're selling people for money into slavery, then you can criticize India. Stupid.